If I was to ask all of you, who in your opinion is one of the most infamous officers on board the RMS Titanic? Well, if you want my opinion, I would say it would be Second Officer Charles Lightoller, mostly because of his actions on the night of the sinking. For those of you who don't know, Second Officer Charles Lightoller got a lot of scrutiny in later years because of his idea on what the order of women and children first into the lifeboats meant. You see, Lightoller had a different opinion than First Officer William Murdoch, who was also in charge of lowering lifeboats. William Murdoch took the order of women and children first as exactly what it says. Women and children first, but if there were no more women and children around, it would be okay to let men on. But Lightoller took the order of women and children first as women and children only, meaning no matter what, Lightoller would not let any men into a lifeboat, period. And that was how he operated throughout the whole sinking. So this opinion of his is what gave him this reputation of being one of the Titanic's most infamous officers. But what if I was to tell you that Lightoller's story doesn't end there? After the whole story of the Titanic, he went on to lead a very eventful life. And for this video, we're going to talk about one event in particular. Lightoller would later become an unknown hero of the Second World War, more specifically in the Dunkirk evacuation in May of 1940. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to talk about how one of the Titanic's most infamous officers would later become a hero in the evacuation of Dunkirk. Okay, well, without any further ado, let's get into today's topic. In mid-May 1940, the German/Nazi military was quickly advancing across Europe. The military quickly took Belgium and swiftly moved into France. Now, even though actions were taken in part of both British and French forces as an attempt to hold back the Germans, these efforts proved to be futile. The German military quickly overwhelmed them and pushed the forces back. Now, when this happened, the British and French forces retreated to Dunkirk, where they waited on the shoreline for other Allied ships to come ashore and pick them up and take them across the English Channel to the safety of the United Kingdom. Although there were major issues in evacuating these men, and there were somewhere around 300,000 men stuck on the beaches of Dunkirk waiting to be rescued, all the while the German army closed in on them. Now, once the German forces had surrounded the city of Dunkirk, the German military then decided to stop directly advancing on the city and then instead proceeded to just surround the city, because their plan was to pick off the Allied soldiers in the city one by one with a bunch of means, like whether it be artillery, whether it be submarines, whether it be airplanes. They would use all of these attempts to just pick off the Allied soldiers one by one without having to risk the main force of their military, because the Germans did know there was over 300,000 soldiers cornered in Dunkirk. Now, at this point, the Allied soldiers' only real hope for escape would be to get on a ship and cross the English Channel and get over to the United Kingdom. Although the Germans had anticipated this, and they took steps to counteract it. But you see, even though the distance from Dunkirk over to the city of Dover in England is roughly only 47 miles, a very short distance to cover by ship, depending on which route you took across the English Channel, the Germans had another threat waiting for you. If you tried to take Route Z, a very direct route from Dunkirk to Dover, you ran the risk of being hit from shore bombardment. If you tried to take a more centerline route from Dunkirk over to Dover, Route X, that area of the channel was mined. And then if you tried to take Route Z away from Dunkirk over to Dover, then you ran the risk of being torpedoed by German U-boats. So as you can plainly see from this map, the Germans made it extremely difficult for the Allies to try to get their troops out of Dunkirk and get them back to the United Kingdom where they would be safe. I want everybody to take a moment and try to imagine what it must have been like to be a soldier on the beaches of Dunkirk waiting to be rescued. I mean, I can't even imagine what that must have been like. You have to remember there's 300,000 men stuck on the beach, and all of these men know that at any time while they're waiting to be picked up, they could be hit by German artillery fire, German aircraft could show up and drop bombs on them, your rescue ship could be torpedoed by a U-boat. I mean, I can't even begin to imagine what that must have been like for all those men stuck on the beach. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a short clip from the film Dunkirk. It's an incredible movie about this whole situation, and I highly encourage you to watch it. But this clip shows all these men on the beach waiting to be picked up when all of a sudden German aircraft show up and are getting ready to drop bombs on them. I'm going to show you this clip just to give you guys a little bit of an idea as to what all of these soldiers were facing. All right, without any further ado, let's roll the clip. gotta tell you, that clip really does put into perspective what all of those poor soldiers on the beaches of Dunkirk were having to deal with. I mean, just imagine standing there waiting for a boat to pick you up, only to hear a German dive bomber getting ready to bomb your location. I mean, I really can't even imagine what that must have been like. Now, as the evacuation of Dunkirk continued, the British Admiralty was having a very hard time getting enough ships together in order to get all of those men off of the beaches of Dunkirk and get them back over to England. So what they ended up doing was hastily putting together a fleet of roughly 800 ships or so. And not all of these were military ships. A good number of these ships were small civilian vessels, like personally owned boats, because they needed every boat they could get their hands on in order to try to evacuate as many of these men as possible. So what the British Admiralty did was they gave permission to the military to go out and take all these civilian ships from their owners, and then they would have a member of the military drive this boat across the channel, get over to Dunkirk, pick up as many people as possible, and then take them back over to the UK. Now, most civilians turned over their ships to the Admiralty without any issues. However, not all. And this is where Lightoller's role in the evacuation of Dunkirk comes in. You see, Lightoller owned a small little boat himself, and when he was ordered by the Admiralty to turn it over to them, instead, he decided to take the boat over to Dunkirk personally in order to evacuate as many men as he could. At the time of the Dunkirk evacuation, Lightoller would have been well into his retirement years. He would have been roughly 66 to 67 years old at the time that the Dunkirk incident occurred. Now, his personal owned boat was a tiny motor yacht known as the Sundowner, and him, along with his son and one other boy, would take this small boat across the English Channel in order to help assist with the Dunkirk evacuation. During the initial part of Lightoller's voyage from England over to Dunkirk, it went without incident. I'm sure he saw his fair share of warships around, he may have seen some airplanes flying around as well, but still, no one really paid him any mind and he continued on with his voyage. Now, when he got to Dunkirk, he was successful in loading over 120 soldiers into his small boat. Keep in mind, his small motor yacht was only designed to hold 21 people, and he was able to get over 120 into that small boat. I'm telling you, it's incredible what you can do when you really put your mind to it. Now, once his boat was fully loaded, he then turned around and began to leave Dunkirk and head back to England. And then, this is when he got noticed by a German dive bomber that was flying over the area. As Lightoller was observing this German aircraft that was flying overhead, he immediately began taking precautions just in case this aircraft would decide to attack. And then it happened. The German dive bomber zeroed in on Lightoller's boat and began to dive straight for it. Lightoller took a position at the very bow of the Sundowner, and then he had his son take the helm of the ship. And then right before the airplane dropped its bomb, Lightoller shouted, "Hard to port." This sudden sharp turn to port allowed the bomb that would be soon dropped by the German aircraft to just barely miss the Sundowner, splashing into the water just off of the ship's starboard side. Then, once the airplane missed its target, the pilot of the German dive bomber decided that Lightoller's boat wasn't worth the effort, and then it flew off to find another target. Now, the only reason Lightoller was even able to deal with this attack by this German aircraft on his boat was because he recognized the technique that this aircraft was about to use in order to attempt to bomb his ship. You see, another one of Lightoller's sons was a member of the Royal Air Force. More specifically, it was Lightoller's youngest son. And sometime before the whole Dunkirk situation occurred, Lightoller and his youngest son had talked about the different types of techniques that aircraft use when they're about to get ready to dive bomb a target. Now, unfortunately, before Dunkirk had happened, Lightoller's youngest son had already been killed in the war. But due to the fact that they had had this conversation and Lightoller knew what to look for in regards to what technique an enemy aircraft was going to use before it attacked, he was able to successfully dodge the bomb of this German dive bomber, thus saving the lives of everybody on his small boat. Now, the total evacuation of Dunkirk took just over a week to complete, and in that amount of time, the Allied forces, despite everything that Nazi Germany was throwing at them, was successful in evacuating over 338,000 soldiers from the shores of Dunkirk and getting them home successfully. Now, even though the Battle of Dunkirk was a defeat and we were forced to withdraw, I also see it as a victory because everybody came together and worked together to figure out a way to get all of those soldiers home. And honestly, think about this for a second, guys. If you lived at the time and somebody asked you, would it be possible to save over 300,000 soldiers from Dunkirk with everything going on, what would you say? I know I would think it would be nearly impossible to do that. But guess what? That's exactly what the Allies did. They were successful in saving all of those men from Dunkirk. And it really does come to show what people can accomplish when they stop fighting amongst themselves and work together as one to achieve the impossible. Because if we all stand together, we can solve anything, just like what the Allied forces did at Dunkirk in May of 1940. Special thanks to Patreon Captain level supporter Callum Whaley. Thank you so much for all the support, man.